Good evening and good morning to one and all present here. I, Afreen Kalaso, am the Assistant Director for University Engagement and Partnership at LSAC Global. It is my honor to welcome you all to the special inaugural webinar series on global perspectives of law from India and beyond, organized by LSAC Global under the Discover Law campaign. We would be hosting a series of new discussion every month, focusing on new initiatives and discoveries in the legal sector. The webinars will be featuring Indian and international leaders to highlight the academic and professional opportunities for students in the field of law. The themes would be focused on professional, academic, international, and jurisprudential aspects of law. To this, we would also like to invite the audience to submit certain ideas through emails or on our social media channels, or even leave suggestions in our chat section today in case of what you'd like to see next in our themes. On behalf of LSAC and the LSAC Global Leadership Team, I would like to thank the panelists and the audience for their continued support, enthusiasm, and dedication towards improving access to legal education, streamlining the admission process, and increasing the diversity of legal profession. On that note, I would like to share a bit of the background of today's theme. India's new education policy 2020 is creating legislative framework to allow foreign universities from around the world to operate campuses in India. Research, especially in the field of law, and eventually student exchange programs will play a vital role in engaging universities across the globe. The NEP 2020 provides opportunities in all forms. Branch campuses is one of the major dimensions here. Other important developments include higher education qualification framework, which will define the competencies and skills of graduates. Indian universities are definitely slowly moving towards self-sustaining models. The aim of today's webinar is to help parents and students understand the benefits of global legal education and to highlight the academic and professional opportunities available to students. Therefore, the webinar aims to discuss the importance of studying law in the ever-changing legal landscape, especially the new challenge the global adversity has thrown to us. Today on our panel, we have Professor Monica Ingram. Professor Ingram is the Associate Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Cornell Law School. She joined Cornell Law School in July 1st, 2015. Previously, she ran the Office of Admissions and Financial Aid at the University of Texas School of Law for more than a decade. Thank you, Professor, for taking out time and for inspiring law aspirants around the globe. We're also delighted to have amongst us Professor Kalantri, Clinical Professor of Law, Cornell Law School. Professor Kalantri writes in the fields of comparative feminist legal theory, international human rights, and empirical studies of courts. Professor Kalantri also serves as the faculty director of the Cornell India Law Center. The center promotes the study of Indian law in the American Legal Academy. Professor, your contribution in the higher education is commendable. We look forward to hearing your views today. We're also extremely honored to have with us Professor C. Rajkumar, a Rhodes Scholar and the founding Vice Chancellor of O.P. Jindal Global University. JGU is one of the only 20 universities in India and the only non-STEM university which has been declared as the institution of eminence by the Government of India. Professor Raj is a man of great vision and a fountainhead of illuminating ideas. We're really excited to learn what you have in store for our young audience today, sir. Last but not the least, we have on our panel the youngest representative, Ms. Swadhina, a fourth-year law student at School of Law, Bennett University. She is an avid reader and she devours books on a variety of topics ranging from science to philosophy. This fueled her shift from medicine to law, and as law would allow her to learn about different legal aspects involving different areas such as medicine, space, and even media. I also had the opportunity to teach Ms. Swadhina a few aspects of constitutional law, so I'm really excited to hear her perspective in the ever-changing dynamics of law. So before we begin, I would like the panelists to briefly open with certain comments. What would be your advice to the law candidates today? Why do you think it's a good time to study law, both generally and say based on your experience in the schools you're focused on? So, Professor Ingram, maybe we can start the first comment from your end.
Well, given what I do on a daily basis, I will tell you that I don't think that there is a better time to study law or go to law school. I think that we have been confronted across the world with a certain number of challenges that those who are educated in the law, studied with critical thinking, are in a unique position to help resolve. I think of the pandemic, a unifier for all of us across the globe, and the positives that have come from it. We have reimagined the delivery of legal education because we had to, because in-person instruction has been so limited. And while we don't think that the formats that we've adapted in the interim for the crisis will be permanently instituted, there are aspects of it that we've learned. For example, the type of activity that we're doing today, this webinar. This will be my second recruiting event of this type in the Indian market this year already. And before, had never done one. Our students are studying in this type of platform. And even with the challenges faced with US immigration as it relates to student visas, all of our students are studying virtually this year, or at least have the ability to study virtually. And so again, it's another unifier. And so I think if nothing else, this climate has taught us that the challenges that arise, we are uniquely positioned to respond to. And so for anyone that's interested or encouraged by the education that they're receiving in India in terms of their legal education and want to further develop it in terms of US legal education, I think that we are very well prepared to support and help them do so.
Definitely, Professor. I agree with that. I think it has definitely unified us in some sort of way. Professor Kalantri, what could be your opening comments on the same?
Thank you, Afreen, and really thank you to the LSAC Global team for organizing this webinar. It's very much of a visionary development and an embarkment, and I'm really happy to be participating in the first ever of these webinars. So what I'll address is why I think a global legal education is so valuable in today's world, and why Indian people and students and lawyers are well suited to be global lawyers. So first, laws no longer respect boundaries. A law in the United States can have an impact in India. Indian laws affect other countries. Transactions are carried out across borders. Contracts are negotiated like mergers. Even human rights abuses of a corporation in one country can be perpetrated in another country. So in a way, everything is global, and transnational really is, I think, a new way to think about law rather than even international. It's public law, it's private law, and it's across borders. And I think Indian people, lawyers, are very suitable to engage in these global practices because of the prevalence of English. English is not the only global language, but it is a global language, and that the fact that many people learn it early on, even though Indian English is very different than American English, you still have, it gives you more access. And I think that you should think about law as a language. I always tell my students in the first year that you're learning a new language. You may not know that right now. And now having degrees in from two different countries or two different legal systems, it's like being multilingual. And some of you might relate to the fact that when I worked at a law firm, all the people who did the Latin America deals spoke fluent Spanish, and they needed to do that in order to gain trust of their clients. And some of the clients didn't even speak English. So I think the more languages and the important languages of the world you can be fluent in, I think the better you will be placed to be a successful lawyer in today's world.
Thank you, Professor, for that. I think it really makes a difference in today's scenario that the worlds have come together, and how, as we as lawyers, can actually put in our thinking caps and work as one rather than working in different jurisdictions. Thank you for that take. Professor Raj, I would like to hear from you in terms of, what do you think? Why is it the best time to study law?
Well, thank you very much once again, Law School Admission Council, for putting this together. It's wonderful to see Seetal and Monica, and great to have Sadhina here talk about the future of legal education. Also, why study law? Listen, I think, at any point of time, I have always believed that the study of law is one of the most empowering things one can do. There are so many injustices that are prevailing in the world, and the study of law enables you to care for injustices and respond to that as well. But I think it is also equally important that we are increasingly living in a society, in a world in which, democratic institutions, including democratically elected governments, including democratically elected leaders, need to be told that rule of law has to be upheld. So in many ways, law and lawyers and those who work in the field of law have a very big responsibility, because we need to ensure that power holders are made accountable, and that's what law does. So at least in the Indian context, the Indian freedom movement was led by lawyers. Mahatma Gandhi was a lawyer, Rajendra Prasad was a lawyer, Sardar Patel was a lawyer, Nehru was a lawyer. Ambedkar was a lawyer. So we had the entire significant part of the core cabinet led by lawyers, and they laid the foundations of Indian Republic and indeed shaped those early years, including the formation of the Constitution, but also the evolution of the early Republic itself. So then, of course, more, from a contemporary standpoint, it is only, fair to say that law helps address social problems. It helps us to develop an analytical mind. It helps people to think through complexity and complex issues and respond to it. It also helps enable businesses to create contractual relationship, through obligations developed in different parties. It also helps for solve disputes. So law is so all-pervasive. In fact, I can only hope that, at least I have always believed that law is the new engineering in India. Just as 2 decades ago, generations of individuals were entering into engineering colleges without even knowing really what they want to do. That scenario is evolving now in the field of law, notwithstanding the fact that there are 1,650 law schools and over 75,000 lawyers are being graduated. The fact is, we really need good law schools and serious students of law entering into legal profession. So law is a transformative opportunity for you to make change.
Definitely, Professor. I couldn't agree more. Now I would actually want to know Swadhina's viewpoint in terms of what her peers think and what her juniors think, that why is this the right time to study law?
Ma'am, before I begin, I'd like to thank you for having me, and to the LAC team for allowing the students' perspective on such an important topic, alongside legal luminaries like Professor Monica, Professor Seetal, and Professor Rajkumar. And coming back to the question, ma'am, when it comes to a student's perspective to why choose law, I believe law is one of those careers that, even if one may choose it out of interest and passion, it's also one of those careers that, even if you do not know that much about law before starting it as a degree, it's something that can produce good, conscientious professionals who contribute to nation building from the start. And as Professor Rajkumar said, that it's something that's all pervasive. So it opens up avenues for you for several professions. Like you can go to the corporate field, you can join the judiciary, you can join the UPSC, politics, media house. So it's a list that is never ending. And furthermore, I believe that even though it's a lucrative career field, it can be socially oriented as well. So a lawyer who knows a little about everything, it's a very practical career choice. And I believe it's only one of the few careers that can equip a student to have the intellectual capacity for varied subject interests and to have the most global exposure as well, especially in times like this, where we are having this online webinar with people from different parts of the world. So I believe it's one of those careers that can open up a student's mind to different perspectives and have knowledge over different areas as well.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you, Swadhina, for those kind words. Let me quickly, shift the gear to Professor Ingram here, because I would really want to know, and some of the audience members would want to speak about your, recruiting efforts in India, and why do you think Indian students make it like a special space at US law schools? What is your take on that?
So I will say, as Professor Kalanche and Kumar know, I've had the distinct pleasure of actually physically recruiting in India last February, actually. And it was a wonderful, unique experience, one of a kind. And unfortunately, it's not practical. It's not sustainable for us to do on a regular basis. And so much as we've done in the United States, we've opened up online recruiting events. And other than the time difference, that's posed the biggest challenge. I think that when we go back to Professor Kalanche's comments, in particular, the shared language of English, knowing that there are some cultural distinctions and differences, but that is a very, from an international student population, that is a very unifying element. And why Indian students are so attractive? Well, for a number of reasons. The strength of their educational program, number one, but also number two, that we would then be recruiting a population that you have the luxury of having the option of studying law as what we would consider an undergraduate degree or a primary degree, which is not available in the United States. And so it brings a level of sophistication, understanding, to US legal education that's then imparted. Cornell in particular, but the majority of law schools in the United States value international student perspective. We do live in essentially a global economy. If we are a world without true hard borders any longer, we need to have a better understanding of how we as communities and cultures and the various legal systems interrelate. Our students from all over the world, in India in particular, come and do really, really well. They thrive here. And so it is a broadening opportunity to not only be able to practice in your home country, but to practice in the United States as well, or to open up various levels of career choice that essentially lengthen and broaden the opportunity for your practice areas. And so the types of insightful questioning that we receive from students within the Indian audience rather, and their ability to relate to the various ideas and the curriculum that we have, I think is really important. I think that it is one of the largest student segments, growing segments in the world. And I think that you will only find greater opportunity for Indian students to study and practice in the United States.
Thanks, Professor. I think that really gives us an hope in terms of what lies ahead in future for the Indian students. And it brings me to Dr. Raj, because I would want him to share his own personal experience of, having studying in leading institutes here in India and then going ahead and pursuing higher education in leading institutes such as the Oxford and the Harvards, So what are the similarities or the differences you notice towards the approach of law school teaching, and how do you think students can adjust to that kind of teaching and exposure?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think legal education has evolved quite significantly in the last over 2 decades. I studied law at the Campus Law Center, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi in the early 90s, and things were still, very different then. And of course, after that, I had the privilege to study law in Oxford and then at Harvard, and then, of course, did my doctoral work at the Faculty of Law, University of Hong Kong. And one of the remarkable things about that journey that I was fortunate enough to have, is really understand different cultures, different societies, different jurisdictions, different legal cultures, and all of them contributing to my own understanding of the law. In many ways, I have always believed that the foundational study of law should happen in one's own jurisdiction where one is familiar with. And so I did my law degree here in India. But after that, both the Oxford and the Harvard experience enabled me to specialize in things that I cared about, that I was interested in. I will say, first of all, it opens up your mind, and that's what any new experience does. But most importantly, it challenges you. I think it's only fair to say again, keeping aside the Jindal experience, traditionally institutions and law schools in India, the opportunities that students get when it comes to pursuing research and intellectually engaging environment, and of course contributing to the whole knowledge creation and knowledge dissemination exercise is limited. And that, of course, has changed a lot over the years. And new law schools in India are at the forefront of reimagining legal education as well. But given that experience, clearly the Oxford and Harvard experience was truly inspiring. I kind of, in fact, the foundations for me personally, it was, I would say it laid the foundations for the dream that I wanted to pursue, which is to build a law school and a university in India. That was laid in those institutions. But also it made me believe in the ideals of law, because depending upon one's own interest, there's a lot of academic and intellectual flexibility offered. You learn both within the classroom, but also outside. There are enormous opportunities to participate in conferences and lectures and workshops and seminars that goes beyond the classroom experience. And again, I was particularly fortunate to have both Oxford and Harvard, because they were two different type of institutions. Oxford had a very engaging tutorial system, which is mostly unsustainable institutionally around the world. That's why nobody does that model. But we were privileged. I could have one-on-one interactions with my teachers, some of the most outstanding leaders in the field, whose books I had read as a student of law, and suddenly they are my own teachers and tutors. And of course, Harvard challenged me even more because of the breadth of the possibilities of courses that I could take being a student there, and the kind of electives that it offered. And I would say this mirrors with the kind of educational experience that's offered at Cornell and other leading law schools in the United States. So the point which I want to really say is that Indian legal education has come a long way since the time I went to law school. But it is only fair to say that after having received the foundations of law at a good Indian law school, I strongly support the idea of young Indian students, law graduates aspiring to study abroad. And I have always recognized the importance of education at a leading US law school, particularly because of the extraordinary opportunity to engage with students from different parts of the world, but also to be able to engage with a legal system which has its own origins through common law, but is also beyond that as well. And I think, and of course, the case study method, which Indian law schools have ended up following, has its origins in the US legal education system. And that also provides opportunities for Indian students who may not otherwise have gotten used to that in many law schools will get that benefit as well.
Definitely, Professor. I couldn't agree more. And I think that also brings me to the next question and it directs towards Professor Kalantri, that given an Indian background and the Indian jurisdiction and the study we do here in law, what do you think could be that academic relation in terms of studying Indian law and pursuing higher education in a US law school?
So I think there's a lot of scope for comparative legal research with India and the United States. So India, being the world's largest democracy and the US being the oldest democracy, suggests that we share many commonalities, some of which is the troubled nature of the democracies that we are all going through around the world. But leaving that aside, there's a lot to learn. There are issues about affirmative action, issues about privacy and data and First Amendment that both countries have dealt with and struggled with. And I think the United States can learn as much from India as India and Indian lawyers might believe they can learn from the United States. And so I founded a center called the India Law Center with the idea of encouraging more comparative study, encouraging law professors in the US to engage more with India, because to be honest, there has been a vacuum of Indian study, of the study of Indian law. Other disciplines in humanities and social sciences have flourished in the study of India since the 60s. University of Chicago, even Cornell has a strong South Asia program, but again, it's in fields like anthropology or other social sciences. So law has largely neglected India. And so my hope is that by encouraging more professors to think about it, by creating a center that focuses on it, by hosting events about India, we would encourage the study, and also then encourage collaborations with law schools in India, which we have wonderful collaborations with Jindal Law School that has existed for the last over a decade, early into the founding of Jindal. And we also have collaborations with the Bennett Law School, which again started at the founding of Bennett. So with these collaborations, we hope to foster Indian students' interests in US law, bring them here for dual degree programs, foster international the study of law. And I think that from my perspective, they've been really rewarding and really successful for us here at Cornell.
Oh, thank you, Professor. Regarding that, I'll come back to you on the questions regarding center. But before we move on to that, I would actually like to have Swadhina, getting into the conversation, because she has been closely associated with Cornell Law School as a student, and the Faculty of Law has taught various credit courses, ranging from subjects like law and literature, international human rights theory and practice, and even psychology and legal studies. So, Swadhina, what has been your experience and how has that helped you in your law school journey so far?
So, ma'am, when it comes to Indian law schools, usually the students, we are taught traditional law subjects as prescribed by the Bar Council of India, especially in the initial semesters. So the main subjects that are taught to us, like constitutional law, administrative law, contract, they are very important, but obviously they can be very information heavy. So when we were informed in our first semester that once the second semester starts, we will be having credit courses by Cornell faculty, and the subjects that will be taught are unconventional nature, although they are related to law. So we were very intrigued by that. So the first subject, as you mentioned, was law, literature, and fiction, which was taught to us by Professor Elizabeth Anker. So what we were used to in relation to law and literature has often been that the intersection that happens between law and the English language or grammar, etc. But this time around, it was something which we traditional law students usually don't do. What we were doing were reading and understanding literature and poetry through the lens of law and the perspective of law students. So as you mentioned, I have always been an avid reader, and I will always read classic novels. So one of them being Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So I was very surprised to see that book and the reading list for law, literature, and fiction. But this time around, when we read that book in class, we read it keeping in mind the author's feminist undertones that she had kept in the book, or the fact that there were many instances in that book that dealt with recognition of human rights. And we focused on poetry that were dealing with very intense topics like gross human rights violations, and reading about different cases. For example, we read one case which was Gretchen versus Gilbert, wherein the lives of human slaves were treated as a subject matter of insurance law rather than under human rights law. So these were very interesting topics that we read in that class, and it was a very interactive type of discussion that we used to have in that class, and everyone had differing opinions, as every time in fiction, everyone has a differing opinion, even if it's from the law perspective. And then in our later semesters, we shifted to more conventional subjects. So the first one being Law and Psychology by Professor Valerie Hans, where akin to criminology, we were studying about psychology of the accused in a matter, or the judges in a judicial matter, or we were dealing with different type of psychological stimuli that affect the decisions of witnesses and the jury. And in that, we were not limited to what was being taught in the lectures. This was the theoretical part, and we also had the practical aspect to it. So the practical aspect being that we were given group projects where we had to analyze landmark Indian cases through the point of view of the psychology of the victim. So this was something that we have never done before, and this was not something that is included in traditional law subjects as well. And the last course that we were taught was International Human Rights in Theory and Practice. So the theoretical aspect was very similar to what we are taught in Indian law schools as well, that what are the origins of human rights law over the centuries in the world, what are the different international agreements and treaties dealing with that, and what were the enforcement mechanisms. But as the difference that is with the global law schools is that they pay more focus to the practical aspect of it. So we were again divided into groups, and this time around we were given hypothetical problems where we had to defend the hypothetical victim's human right violation and decide according to the different treaties and agreements in place for human right violations. And it was presided over by a bench, including Professor Elizabeth Brundage, who taught that subject, and our own faculty. So when it comes to my experience, I believe that this was one of those experiences where it was not just a great learning experience for us, it was an enjoyable experience as well. As I said, it was not limited to what we are taught in lectures or books, and the more focus was on the practical aspect of it. And these type of subjects, it helped us to develop analytical skills for subject matter, and not just analyzing, suppose, a traditional legislative instrument or a case law. We were looking at fiction through the lens of law, or we were looking at case laws through the point of view of psychology. So it was one of those skill sets that I think every law student should have, that even if they're reading any subject matter, they're able to see it from the perspective of law. And lastly, the international exposure that we had in terms of both faculty and course content, it was very useful and very enlightening for us.
Thank you, Sadhina. I think that was really insightful, because you had that experience while, being a student at Bennett, and Professor Raj also gave us an example how he had different experiences from Oxford and Harvard in terms of the international exposure. So even though those have been different for both of you, but in terms of having that final say, or the final crux of the whole integration, I think that has somehow been achieved at your end as well. So just moving on to that, I would ask Professor Raj here that, what are these criteria a parent or a law aspirant should consider while they're selecting a law school? And could you also shed some light on the efforts Jindal has made to provide that global exposure to students, like how Swadhina has just given an example of her experience?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think, as having said that, if I am engaging with Indian students, I would strongly, encourage them to consider the pursuit of their first degree in law in India. Not only because of the fact that they should keep their options open when it comes to potentially wanting to be in India, because today we are living in a global world where geography has become history, so it could be anywhere else. But then, to keep the option open, increasingly the regulatory ecosystem when it comes to allowing those students who have not obtained their first degree in law in India and having studied law elsewhere is becoming more and more complicated, and hence it's better advised to be here. But even more than that, I would say that undergraduation is the first experience a student has when he or she is exposed to the social realities of India. And I think that foundational knowledge, understanding, perspectives, all of that needs to be preserved and protected. And that's why I've been a strong votary of that. Now, when it comes to choosing a law school in India, that's actually a more difficult question, but I think it's in a way it's difficult also because of the competition involved. Increasingly, I mean, the fact is, even though there are 1,650 law schools in India, even Bar Council of India says that hardly 30 to 40% of them are good enough. So in many ways, you have a fairly small group of schools that are, possibly worthy of consideration for a bright law student. And that makes it extremely competitive when it comes to being part of it. Of course, I have always believed that the most important criteria in any institution is the qualification, the quality of the faculty members. And that's the most important aspect that any potential student should consider, whether it is an Indian university or abroad. Once you have that threshold comfort level when it comes to good faculty, then you can add on top of it to what extent the institution is promoting interdisciplinarity, to what extent it has created an internationally engaged ecosystem for providing opportunities to the students, to what extent the institution has tie-ups with international universities, but also with other organizations, including law firms and NGOs and think tanks and research institutions and courts, and what kind of internship and placement opportunities that are provided for the students, to what extent clinical legal education is promoted, and how students are having an opportunity to pursue experiential learning, to what extent mooting culture and advocacy related initiatives are promoted. So you can run through a number of things. Of course, I will also say that more today, physical infrastructure also matters. I think when you are living in residential university campuses, you expect that your basic comfort and other things are taken care of, and you're used to focusing on the things which is most important. So all these things are important in determining where you want to study, at least in the Indian context. But then the most important part of all of that is what kind of an academically engaged, intellectually vibrant ecosystem that the institution, the law school, is providing, so that you are able to get an inspiring education. Because the heart of legal education is it should challenge you, it should inspire you, it should help you to make the world a better place, it should help you to address some of the most fundamental injustices that are prevailing in whatever forms and manifestations that may be there. So that's the core of the decision making that one has to do when one thinks about where they want to study.
Definitely, Professor. I hope the audience is keeping notes of these things in terms of what should be the right school for them, catering to the kind of needs they would want to achieve, whether it's faculty members they want to look at or the courses a particular law school offers. I think all of them become an important role in terms of choosing the right law school, which also, leads to another question, and which I'll, like Professor Kalantri to address, is that you've created this India Center, and what were those main goals you had in mind while creating this center? And if you could also shed some light on the dual degree program, which you mentioned with Jindal and with collaboration with Bennett, so that the audience is well acquainted with these programs.
So I have a lot of collaborations with many law schools in India. I'm on the board of advisors of the Jindal Global Law School in terms of the law review. I'm a faculty fellow there. Also I often visit the law school, National Law School in Maharashtra, because my family is from Nagpur when I'm there. And I think that, to me personally, it's important to develop these relationships and collaborations to encourage Indian students to study in the US, but as I said, also to encourage US faculty and American law students to be interested in India. We have a program where we have a summer internship, a fully funded summer internship for American law students. And this last summer we had to be virtual, but that law student from Cornell Law School worked with the Vice Dean of Experiential Learning at the Global Law School, Deepika Jain. She worked on her center on transgender issues and other issues, and she found it wonderful, even doing it virtually, and she learned so much about it. The dual degree program is I think very innovative, and it's something that we have currently only with the Jindal Global Law School. So the idea is that law students can save 2 years on their legal education. So if they get a 5-year, normally they would, if they wanted an Indian law degree, it would take 5 years, and then an American law degree, which is a JD, as compared to the LLM, it would take 8 years. But Cornell will give credit of 1 year for their study at Jindal, and Jindal will give 1 year for their study at Cornell, and they can then save both 2 years in time and 2 years in tuition. And the students that we've gotten from Jindal so far have been extremely successful in finding their own job placements, even though they're a bit off cycle in terms of recruiting. They have worked for a prosecutor. Many have joined firms or are interning for firms. And the student that they've also been top performers at Cornell Law School. One of them won the moot court competition, as well as being one of the top students. So I think having Indian students in the first year classroom is really interesting as well. So when you have a student who's taken constitutional law in India and is taking constitutional law in the US, she can bring a new perspective that somebody without that legal training couldn't bring. And unlike students from other countries where there is no constitution or where there is no democracy, even if they have a law degree in those other countries, it doesn't really bring in a great dynamic or a great interesting conversation. So I think that with Bennett, we have this relationship. I think Swarina did a great job of describing the courses that she has taken. We're continuing this relationship. This year, we're doing the courses virtually due to the pandemic. And these are mini courses about, a full week or 10 days where they're intensely taught and meeting requirements for whatever credits they need from the Bar Council. And this way, the students get exposed, that they can stay in India and get exposure, get a flavor for what a Cornell Law School course would be like. Because the faculty that we're sending are, permanent, tenured, or tenure track faculty from the law school. So unlike this year where it's virtual, all past years, every faculty has gone to campus in Bennett every day, met with the students, taught the classes. And so I think that is a great opportunity for the students, but also, again, for our professors who don't have any exposure to India to learn about the legal system there.
Definitely, Professor. I think I've also had the privilege to sit through those classes, and they have really benefited in terms of opening my perspectives to different angles of constitutional law, constitution comparative law. And also the dual degree program. I think that sort of brings me to the question that, yes, Cornell does offer these dual degree programs, but, Professor Ingram, you could help me in today's time, how the pandemic has affected this international interest in attending US schools. And how will the international student admission and intake be affected in the law schools in the US because of the whole current situation? Do you think there has been an impact, or do you think this disruption has opened some new doors and avenues for students?
Well, I think there's definitely been an impact, if not in the actual numbers of students, in how students prepare, or the level of heightened concern about navigating, first of all, the immigration process to be able to be successfully admitted. Our international cohort, I think, is equally as strong as it has been. I think that the numbers of students were down slightly this year, Not in terms of admission, but in terms of enrollment. And we saw that reflected in students opting to defer because of the uncertainty of navigating the immigration process. I will say that my firsthand experience was that it was more country by country in terms of how well students were able to navigate access to the consulates or embassies. We found that actually our Indian students navigated it probably better than any other country other than South Korea. Actually, they had the least amount of problems. So what schools have been doing, and what we did in particular, was we tried to lengthen that notification process, give as much information as we could earlier, communicate specifically what students needed to do, and then we allowed a lot of flexibility on the back end for when students needed to arrive. And so we instituted a delayed arrival system, allowing them, if they were opting to study in person, to be able to get to school after school had started, to allow them to be able to transition with all of their documentation and being able to not feel the kind of pressure that they would typically have to make during the summer. So our Indian students arrived in early fall, which a number of our students did. Now, I mentioned before that one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that we were able to envision delivering legal education in a little different manner, online, typically as we're doing now. And so, but that, it didn't in any way create an ostracization of our international students. All of our students were then taking, using this as a platform for study. And so we were able to communicate almost uniformly the same kinds of challenges. We actually thought that the majority of our students were going to opt for remote instruction and to study in their home countries or their home states. Over 85% of our students wanted to study in person. And so the majority of them are here within the greater Ithaca community, but some of them are still studying remotely in their own apartments or wherever their residence is. And so what I think what we have done a better job of doing is communicating those kinds of resources that are needed, the time frame that they're needed, and then providing additional flexibility on the back end to allow students to actually navigate the process and to arrive. I also think that one of the benefits of having studying at a large research, internationally recognized research-based institution is that we have international resources for faculty and students at the university level, in addition to those resources that are available at the law school level. And so that gives an additional level of comfort. And then lastly, I will comment to piggyback on Professor Kalantri's reference to some of the programs that we've done. What I think is very helpful for students is to be able to identify a pipeline of students that are from their institutions, their home institutions, or their home countries or cities that have successfully navigated the transition to these US-based programs, so that they have an expectation of the kind of welcome they're going to receive. For all students transitioning to law school from their undergraduate degrees in the US, this level of education is different. It's taught in a very different manner. And so that adjustment is universal for all students. Now, maybe the cultural challenge is a little bit more difficult for international students, but it's still a time of transition for the entire class. And so what I think is really important is that our students, international and domestic, recognize that they're all kind of in this together. And so they have shared resources, looking for shared outcomes, and confident though in knowing that the quality of the education that they're going to receive, the resources that are there and are available for them will be there.
Thank you, Professor. It's great to see the initiatives Cornell is taking up to make sure the international students are comfortable and they can blend into the kind of environment which we are living in today. And it's great that, like you mentioned, that 85% of the students really wanted to study on campus. I think that really makes a difference, especially when we talk about universities. You need to have the look and feel of what a university setup looks like. And it's great that, Cornell is moving to that direction. That brings me to another question, and Professor Kalantri would be, possibly the right person to help me here, especially keeping the new educational policy in mind. Do you think Cornell and other US law institutes would be interested to set up campuses in India now that, the government is open to this idea? And how do you envision that happening in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so I think that it's a great initiative of the Indian government. Indian institutions of higher education, in my mind, have not traditionally been very globally minded. Even though we have graduates of the IITs that are running major corporations and major industries around the world, I think Jindal Global Law School to me and Jindal University was one of the few that I know that has really attempted to engage globally, and Bennett is another one. So I think that this education policy, I think, gives a framework and a mindset to Indian institutions to say, look, there's a value for us in looking abroad. Maybe it was the hope that it would reverse the brain drain if we have people studying in India. I think the challenges of in having a place like Cornell or anybody else to set up a campus in India is the financial challenges. So it's quite expensive. Even other universities that have set up centers have found it very expensive to do so. So India, there's not just the expense that it is of finding space, of hiring global faculty and recruiting them and bringing them to India, where we feel happy that it's under a Cornell brand. We also have a lot of regulatory challenges to get through that takes more time in India than other countries. But the biggest issue is that, India might look to Cornell, for example, has a medical school in Qatar. And Singapore, Yale has a collaboration in Singapore with NUS. NYU has a big campus on Abu Dhabi. But what do those things share in common? They share in common millions and millions of dollars that has been put forward by those governments in order to help these universities come there. So if you're asking a university where we actually don't even have hundreds of millions of dollars standing by to bring to India, and for what, possibly a risky investment anyway, we may never even break even. So one of the ways you can get around that, if the Indian government won't offer hundreds of millions of dollars, is to work with alumni in various countries who might be interested in setting up a Cornell campus. So one of our notable alumni is Ratan Tata, and he's a trustee, and he's given over $50 million to scholarships for Indian students. So maybe he would be interested in helping bridge the gap of getting students. But again, it's the funding is just one issue. The other challenge is, location, recruiting top-notch faculty, and then after that initial investment, making it a sustainable business. I mean, a break-even business. We're a nonprofit, so we're not trying to make money, but we can't lose money. We shouldn't be losing money, then we wouldn't be in business.
Definitely, Professor. I think it's really important because the government really wants to establish these campuses, but it has to be a two-way process, right? Both have to work collaboratively. And I think the idea of having an alumni working closely with US institutes would definitely open doors for students here. And that actually brings me to Professor Raj here, because I would want to know his idea in terms of, the idea of Vishwaguru, world teachers coming to life now. Do you think the new wave of development and the concept of internationalization of higher education, do you think India would be the hub of opportunities for these foreign universities? And what is your take on this?
Thank you, Afreen, for that. Listen, First of all, I would say that we are already a bit late in that imagination. World has moved on. In fact, the universities themselves have moved on. The global experiences of universities, particularly from the United States and Australia, which are the two countries which actually ended up setting up campuses in different parts of the world, has not necessarily been very good. And as Sital mentioned, there are huge, financial investments made, and not necessarily made by the universities themselves. Malaysia has brought in universities from Australia and other parts of the world. We've seen some such experiences in the Middle East. But I would say we need to rethink that dimension a bit more. And I will say this, in fact, I'm engaged very closely now with the government of India also in many of these conversations. And my own view has been that both the economies of scale, regulatory ecosystem that we have in India, the inability for Indian government to put in that kind of resources, and why should we? And also to recognize that with the COVID-19, a whole new set of challenges have emerged. So I don't believe that the world's best universities today are in a position to establish brick and mortar campuses in India, although that could have been an imagination a decade ago. But at the same time, I also see enormous potential for substantive international collaborations, including partnerships, a whole range of possibilities on faculty and student exchanges, joint teaching and joint research, joint conferences and joint publications, dual degree programs and short-term study abroad programs. So in terms of collaboration, there is enormous possibility, and that's what I think India should be moving in the direction. I also think that one of the important aspects of the national education policy, which I would like you to know, Afreen, is that very interestingly, the policy, while enables opportunities for universities to do many things, it has specifically kept both legal education and medical education out of it, which means that NEP does expect the current regulatory architecture as far as legal education and medical education to remain as it is. And I don't need to elaborate more. And if that is going to be the case, then the existing framework of how partnerships need to be evolved also will remain the same as well. So from that standpoint too, it's important for us to think about internationalization very differently than the rather traditional concept of brick and mortar campus. And now with digitization and online education and platforms such as Upgrad, where where we've done blended LLM program as well as MBA programs, the opportunities are enormous for collaborating. As far as the vision of a world teacher is concerned, truly that is already there. I think we have some institutions have begun to do it more strongly than others. The pandemic, if at all anything it has done, is it has brought that vision to much closer proximity. Universities and institutions from around the world, are all coming together. Can you believe in the next, say, 10 days on 25th, 26th, and 27th, we are organizing a global virtual conference on legal education, reimagining and transforming law schools and legal education. I have 100+ deans of law schools from around the world, literally from every part of the world joining the conversation. We have judges from around the world speaking in that conference. So this simply could not have been possible. In fact, I dare to say that this will be the largest conglomeration of law school deans speaking at a conference, because something like this may not happen physically because it requires scheduling and resources and all of that in a different scale. So in a way, I would like to say, let's use the opportunity that the pandemic has provided, and when it comes to bringing all of us together and more closer. Lastly, on internationalization, I would say, and I think Cornell is a very different type of institution, and that's why we have a very strong partnership with them, and they are invested in India. But the old model of internationalization, where fee-paying students coming from developing countries and going to developed countries and paying millions of dollars or pounds or other types of currencies around the Western world in particular is not going to be sustainable. More and more students are going to challenge that framework and are increasingly looking at opportunities in their own countries, in their own societies. And this democratization of higher education, democratization of internationalization as a framework is going to drive the future of higher education and universities.
Thank you, Professor Raj. I think those were really commendable observations, especially in terms of implementing the NEP. It's quite a challenge. I know the government has said that, by 2022, they'll start rolling out initiatives around it. But again, it poses trillions of challenges for Indian universities as well as international universities. So we're quickly running out of time, but before we take up question and answers from the audience, I have one last question for Swadhina. Just a quick one. What do you think are those additional tools law schools could adopt to enhance, the academic and the advocacy skills of a student? What are the changes law schools can adopt to make a law student industry ready? So if you could give me like quick pointers there before we open up for question answer round.
Sure, ma'am. Ma'am, when it comes to the domestic level, first, I would say that as the traditional Indian legal education, when we look at it, it's mostly on the theoretical aspect is what the focus is upon. So previously, students themselves used to take the initiative to participate in moot court competitions or mock trial competitions to get that practical exposure. But over time, Indian law schools, they have also realized the importance of the practical application. So nowadays, workshops on different subject matters and collaboration with different experts in those subject matters has become a very common practice. However, I feel like in India, there has been a giant shift that students nowadays are not too enticed by litigation. Rather, they are more inclined towards corporate law. So most of them want to work in the top law firms or become in-house counsels. So I feel that at the domestic level, firstly, the law school should insist that workshops should not be only litigation based, but that I think that there should be a focus on imparting knowledge for transactional law as well. So workshops on drafting contracts or conducting regulatory research on behalf of a company. These are some skills that even from a global perspective, if a student who wants to pursue, suppose LLM in corporate law or commercial law abroad, a student in India who is already well versed in the basic aspects or transactional law, he would become a much better candidate for these type of LLMs abroad. And now, as all of the panelists mentions that due to the NEP policy, there's this hope of opening brick and mortar campuses of top tier law schools in India, but there are many challenges for that. So from a student's perspective, the things that that can happen just now after this advent of the NEP is that they can have that even leaving out Jindal and Bennett University, even other law schools, they can conduct, they will have a ease for conducting student exchange programs or faculty exchange programs with the top law schools and have other collaborations like the ones we have at Bennett. So furthermore, due to the pandemic, there has been an increase in the possibilities for digital learning. So there can be resource collaborations like library to library collaborations, or the fact that we are having joint webinars or conferences with people from different countries. So these are one of the opportunities that have opened up for law students in India. And the fact that students will be able to do credit courses with such top tier universities or have research collaborations, or the fact that they can study one semester abroad in these universities that count towards the degree back home, I feel this will most definitely help our students to gain an edge and also to increase our employability and job prospects. Furthermore, ma'am, I believe that the competition in India is very high. So nowadays, each and every student after completing their law degree want to go for an LLM abroad. So these type of initiatives, as they are taken at the ground level, at the domestic level only, it will help to distinguish themselves from the get-go only. So I feel that they will learn law at the domestic level while doing their graduate degree, but also be exposed to a global perspective from the start if such collaborations become more easier to happen in Indian law schools.
Thank you, Swadhina. I think we all are looking forward to what could be those possible collaborations and new disruptive collaborations which can take place. Now, I'll quickly take up the questions from the audience and probably, ask our panelists to answer them. I'll direct it towards you, but in case somebody wants to jump in and, share their light on those questions, I'll be happy to take that. So the first one being, does pursuing higher legal studies in the States restrict a student's job opportunities in India? And perhaps Professor Raj and Kalantri can, collaboratively answer this question. Are there any restrictions which happen in those front?
Sita, do you want to answer, or I'll?
Yeah, you go ahead, Rajan.
Okay, well, not at all. I mean, absolutely not. I think, again, we need to make a very important distinction between pursuing, let's say, a master's degree in law, LLM type, as opposed to a primary law degree. I mean, we should know that, once you do a law degree in India, there are, of course, Bar Council of India has recognized some law schools, their degrees in a way. That's another very interesting thing. It's not necessarily based upon a particular law school standing or anything. It's an individual basis on the basis of which such recognitions happened. Be that as it may, there is no question of any, disqualification or it in any way undermining one's, abilities to get a job. In fact, I would go a step further that gone are the days when your aspiration to pursue law degree, LLM abroad in the US in particular should be based upon getting a job there. There aren't many jobs there, with all due respect to my American friends. Jobs are here. We will be soon recruiting American law graduates into Indian, law firms and companies and corporations, and we're already doing that in academia. So the point I want to say is that go for the education that they are going to give you. The American law schools, which we are discussing today, are outstanding institutions. You will have a transformative legal education experience. You will have an intellectually vibrant ecosystem in which you will learn so much. It will also help you to develop a comparative legal understanding on many issues. Get that knowledge, perspective, skills, awareness. And that will always be putting you in good stead for your future. And most likely your future is going to be in different parts of the world, possibly in India. But do not, let's say, think about, pursuing LLM in the US purely from the standpoint of a return on investment measured in dollar terms, that you will end up getting a job there. That is less likely to happen now and for the next several years.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Kalantri, would you like to add something on that aspect?
So one of the things I would add, I think Raj is very familiar with the Indian market, and I would defer to him on that. One of the things I would add is that if you don't have a law degree from India, and let's say you came directly to Cornell, and I do have students that do that. One of my research assistants went to LSR, Lady Shri Ram College, and then came here to get her JD. There are some law schools that are recognized by the Indian Bar Council, where, and Cornell is one of them, and Cornell was one of the first ones where our education can qualify for the Indian bar requirements to practice law in India after you go through some other formalities. So if you want an exclusive JD and not do an Indian law degree, you could do that, but make sure that your school that you're going through is on that list of schools that the Indian Bar Council recognizes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. The next question is, it says that up to what extent distant legal education is good for students, and it's given its exposure to students. So I think the student wants to understand that, how is it different to study law in a university and studying legal education as a distance program? Professor Ingram, maybe you could help us throw some light on this particular aspect. Do you think there is any difference as such? And what are the things a student needs to keep in mind while pursuing distant legal education?
So I will say, as I understand the question, that there is not wholesale study of US legal education as a distance model. Mm-hmm. We have our accrediting body, the American Bar Association, allows a percentage of our study to be as a distance model. So there isn't a student that could attain a full degree under that model right now. And so the constraints, and largely they're imposed upon us by the conditions of which we're all living in as vestiges of the pandemic, is that we have to, one of the hallmarks at Cornell's education is that it's a small school. It's a very intimate student body. And of the schools that I visited in the greater New Delhi area last spring are similar in that you have great access to your professors. You have a wonderful cohort of working with your classmates. And so that level of interaction, if you think about Professor Kalantri and her reference to her research assistant or teaching assistants, that is the challenge of what is lessened in distance education. I will say that technology has gone to great strides. There probably is very little that is different in terms of our presentation today than the ones that we did 9 months ago in India. And so I think that some of the gaps, some of the concerns, the ability to have synchronous learning have been exceptional. The biggest detractors, I think, are what we call Zoom fatigue, sitting in front of the laptop, the monitors. And I think, but that toll is equally distributed among all of our students. And so there isn't a disproportionate effect placed upon an international student or someone that is being delivered, is receiving their education differently.
So I'll quickly add something to what Monica had said. One is, of course, we need to make an important distinction between undergraduate and graduate studies. And there is, if you're talking in terms of, using technology and pursuing even online type programs, that aspect is important. Where, graduate education, there is more, let's say, adaptability and acceptability and context to it. The second important thing is pre-COVID, during COVID and post-COVID. Right now, this is not a choice that most of us have, right? Of course, Cornell is quite remarkable and exceptional that it opened up boldly and it's opened up as a university now physically, but that's not the case with most universities around the world, even in the United States. So we have to see what's going to happen in a post-COVID context when it comes to the acceptability and adaptability of, let's say, technology-based programs. And the third, which I think is absolutely critical here, is that when it comes to technology-based programs for professionals who don't want to quit a job and actually go to a university. Now, hitherto, they didn't have such an option meaningfully available for them. With now organizations like Upgrad and others around the world, there is an opportunity for you to pursue absolutely world-class education in an 100% online mode. In fact, the government of India has more recently recognized the importance of online education. And although it came in the context of COVID itself, but now, several universities in India are empowered to offer 100% online degree programs. So in some ways, the idea of online education is here to stay, but we need to understand the flexibility that it offers of professionals as opposed to those undergraduate students who actually need a physical ecosystem where peer group learning and more close proximity mentoring is essential.
Definitely. Thank you, Professor. Yes, Professor.
Actually, add another distinction to this. You should distinguish asynchronous classes from synchronous classes. So synchronous being live, the way we are right now, and asynchronous being where the professors have taped short videos and you have exercises and discussion sessions. So another hat that I wear is I'm the faculty director of online education, and I've started a new master's program that's fully online. And it's asynchronous. but we have office hours. So there's interactions between professors and students through office hours, and also through the online discussion groups. So what I would say is that, as Raj, I agree with Raj that these are all working professionals that have, we actually wanted them to make sure they had a job in their industry. They're all busy. We have CFOs of companies. We have people in the Secret Service. These are a course for non-lawyers. We'd have an over doubled enrollment than we could handle initially. We've doubled our enrollment. So it's been very popular. And I would say that on synchronous education, it's harder to do asynchronous in a law school format for the first year course, because our first year courses in the US rely very much on the Socratic method, which is a dialogue with the student and the professor. And that dialogue is difficult in an asynchronous format. But in a synchronous format, you could even do it online in a synchronous format. But I don't see, as Monica said, that Cornell we value the in-person education. We're not going to do for the JD, we probably won't be doing an online model, but it does work very well for other degrees like professional degrees.
Thank you, Professor Seidel, for that. I think the next question is by a student, Maria. She says just two questions. That is, what do we have to do to get a dual degree program, as you mentioned, what Cornell is offering? And what is better, pursuing an LLM in the US or doing this dual degree programs with US-based universities? So I think the student wants to know the kind of difference and the exposure they will get.
So is that for me, or?
Yes, Professor Seidel, you can take that over. Professor Ingram can also swear in.
Okay, sorry. So so I think dual degree is one of the issues with the dual degree is that you have to be in a law school that offers it. So if you go to NALSAR, they don't have dual degree programs, so you don't have that option. I think Jindal is possibly the only one that I know that has multiple dual degree programs with multiple schools in the US. And I think that, what's nice about it is, again, like I said, you in 2 years, you get an American JD, whereas an LLM is a 1-year degree, and you don't get as much credibility or acceptability necessarily with sort of American law firms and American institutions. It's easier to get a job globally and in the US with the JD than it is with an LLM. But if you're just interested in, going back to India, probably an LLM is suitable, because normally a JD would take 3 years. The JD requires an LSAT, whereas, the LLM, I think, is typically not as hard to get into. Getting an admission to a JD program at Cornell is very hard for anybody. And you can see from our median LSATs, I mean, Monica will tell you, our GPAs are, close to the, 97, 98 percentiles, LSATs close to that percentile. So, it's, I think, thinking about where you are in terms of credentials and what your goals are if you're considering JD versus LLM.
So Afreen, I will add, we didn't talk a lot about it, but I would say that this is where, Law School Admission Council and LSAT exam itself comes in. Because at the heart of this whole exercise is that LSAC's vision has been to, really determine who are those students who are best suited to study law. And the test itself is the framework for determining, one's capabilities, interests when it comes to pursuing law. And I think that's what one of the reasons why Jindal Global Law School adopted LSAT India as the test to select law students. And since our founding, we've been doing that, is precisely to help students address those questions, that are they suitable to pursue law as a career option in the future? Are they well suited to study law? And then the question is about the choices that Seidel talked about. As far as the choice between LLM and JD is concerned, I think it's a very individual choice one has to make, because at the end of the day, JD is an American law degree. And if your goal is to actually be in the United States, then the dual degree model or independent JD is a good idea, but that's not the goal, and that you're actually much more interested to be working as a sort of a global lawyer in any part of the world, including India, then a qualification like LLM would be more than sufficient. But again, I will say this, that international qualifications should not be only seen through the prism of the job opportunities that are going to come in the countries where those degrees could be pursued. You need to be looking yourself globally, and that's the future.
Thank you, Raj, for this, because I think that's important for us to know as students, that what would be the right test, number one, to get into law school, and how is that test helping us bridge that gap, right? And then how that particular law school will go ahead and help us integrate some skills and make us a better, and like how they say, industry ready, quite honestly. So I think that leads to another question, which the audience member, is keen to ask is, they're saying that there's an excess of material when they go out and study law, and its aspects on how does one pursue the study of law through these resources. So they're asking, are there any recommendations? I think the student is pretty burdened with different law subjects. How would they try to integrate? Because now there's a Pandora box which is open in terms of access to legal education. So student is quite confused as to which one to opt for. What would be the right way to utilize these resources, and what are the already existing resources you would recommend for studying law? So Professor Kalantri could probably take this up, or Professor Raj, if you would like to add to this.
Sorry, I didn't get the question fully. Can you quickly repeat it for me?
Yes. So the question is regarding the access of resources available to study law. There's, like I said, there's a Pandora of different resources available. What is the right resource to look at, and what is not really overwhelming for a student to go ahead with?
No, when you talk in terms of resources, are you talking about information about where you can study law? Is that for?
It's about where and how to take up a law course, and what to do in that 5-year law journey or a 3-year law journey.
Well, I mean, listen, in the Indian context, it's pretty easy, right? Everybody knows which are the top law schools, and there are basically 2 major examinations you want to take, and you have widen your choices between LSAT and CLAT. And I would say you should go with the LSAT, not because you guys are hosting it, but we strongly believe in the LSAT as a framework of assessing students. But when you're looking at US, it gets more complicated for a number of reasons. One, the usual choices, be it Cornell, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, Berkeley, and all of them. But I think it's also important for you to look at what is it that you intend to gain out of the program. Will you want to have a specialized LLM? Are there areas and disciplines within law that you have interest, and are there faculty members or research centers or other types of institutional initiatives that a particular law school has promoted, which resonates with you? So there, I think talking to alumni from those schools that you want to go, or doing some research or engaging with people would help you. In many ways, that's an important informed choice that you're making. Of course, if you're getting a scholarship, then I know students have always preferred to go to an institution which they get scholarship, even though that may not be their first choice, because then financial matters comes into play. If you're paying for yourself or getting a loan, then you are far more circumspect about where you want to study. So it's a very important decision that one has to go through. And I think it's good to do your research and do your own talking to people, mostly professors in your own law school or other places who guide and mentor you.
Thank you, Professor. Yes.
So let me give you some practical resources to be able to kind of carve into the US legal market, just because I can imagine it would be very overwhelming. So some good starting points. And one of the big distinctions in studying in the US that Professor Kumar has alluded to is the cost of the legal education in the United States. And so how do you sort that out? And all of your choices need to be predicated upon what you wish to do. So if you want to study or have the ability to practice in the United States, the JD is the most marketable. The Juris Doctor is the most marketable degree. So practically speaking, where would I start if I were you? First, I would look at the list of law schools that are approved by the Bar Council of India. Even if you have your primary degree, your first degree from India, at least it gives you a list of schools that are already recognized by your country as providing the level of education of which they would have accepted a first degree from there. The second is LSAC, the Law School Admissions Council, who is sponsoring this today, has wonderful resources. And it has a guide to the US law schools. It's all online. And it is consistent format of information. We don't have 1,600 law schools in the country. The US only has about, I think, roughly 204 ABA accredited law schools. And so the list is a little bit smaller. We have something called the 509 report, which is the ABA required disclosures. It allows you to compare law schools using the same information in the same exact format. And so that can help you kind of whittle down what you're looking for, not only, for example, what the international demographics are at the school, the total school size, what kind of credentials are they looking for, the types of academic performance, but their employment outcomes as well, their bar passage rates, which helps you to know how effective is their education in being able to successfully graduate those students. And then the last distinction I will make, because we talked about it earlier before the webinar, because it can be a point of confusion, is there is the LSAT that is offered in India for India law schools, but there is the US LSAT. Please know that it is, while administered, both are administered by LSAC, that it is a different diagnostic that you would be required to take if you're pursuing the JD. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful in terms of narrowing down your approach to starting a search for study of US law schools if you're pursuing the JD.
Thank you, Professor, for that. I think we are quickly running out of time, but I would like the panelists to make one last comment in terms of the audience listening to us. Why should a student study law, and what do you think one should look out for in the next couple of 5 to 10 years? Because that's where their journey starts, and they'll see themselves placed somewhere in the next decade or so. So if I could have a quick comment there, starting with Professor Raj, if you could give us.
All right. Listen, for all the students who are thinking about what your future is going to be and should be, I would say that the most important choice that you can make is your decision to study law. And in fact, this decision does not even mean that you want to be a lawyer. The study of law will open up your mind and will help you make important choices. But most importantly, it'll also help you to help others. It will empower you to understand some of the most fundamental challenges of our society and also address them as well. You will also be more conscious and aware of inequalities and to what extent law as an instrument of social change can help address those inequalities. You will also contribute towards strengthening democratic institutions and democracy, and in that process help build a society based on the rule of law. So law is all pervasive, and you couldn't have, you wouldn't take, it wouldn't be any better decision than, any other pursuit for you to do law. Lastly, I will say that when it comes to education, value the importance of good quality education, because that is going to lay the foundation for your future. And that's why conversations such as this, I'm sure, will help you. Many of us, frankly, I didn't have the privilege of LSAC and Sital Kalantri and Monica, guiding me about my future when I was like you. So this is an extraordinary privilege that many of you have got, and make the best use of it.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Kalantri, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I just want to, encourage people to take the best decision they can, given their personal needs, their emotional needs, their structure that they are in, whether their future goals, what kind of law they want to study is really important. and not just study law that is the most profitable to do. Study law that you have the most passion about, because ultimately your career and your happiness and your success in your life really depends on doing what you love. So that's my advice for people. And maybe it's not being a lawyer, maybe it's not even going to law school, but if you do go, like I said, we think that a law degree is so rigorous that it prepares you to do anything. We have so many graduates of Cornell Law that are in business, that are not lawyers, that have started their business, that are doing other things. So it definitely is thought of here in the US, much more so in India, as a not necessary, it's a degree you get just to be a better informed person and better trained for whatever you want to do.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Ingram?
I certainly will concur with everything that my panelists, co-panelists have said. So I will take a slightly different tact. I think there is no better time to go to law school. I think there is no better level of education to pursue, either as a first degree or as a graduate professional degree. What I will say is that as the choice is individual, so much of what you are doing, the study aside, is about relationships. And the relationships that you enter into are lifelong. If you listen to Professor Kalantri talk about her former students, and when we were in Delhi, and she is visiting with students who studied in the US that she's now seeing while we're in India, and talking about the trajectory of their career, how those relationships help you progress throughout your lifetime. The majority of us, I would say, with the exception of Swadina, are not doing the exact same thing that we were doing when we finished our legal education. And so the foundation of that education is very important, and how strong it is and how well it will prepare you for a career that you can't even envision. And so again, I can't help but echo, I think that this is probably, and continues to be, the strongest and best profession that any of you could ever be prepared for, whether you're going to practice in your home country or abroad.
Thank you, Professor. And last but not the least, Swadina, because I feel she can really connect with the audience and she'll be the best person to answer this question, that why study law, you being in your 4th year now, moving into the next phase in life in terms of your professional degree. What are your last words to the students here?
Ma'am, from a student's perspective, I feel that a career in law is the only career where you can actually evolve and change societal norms and social norms. It's one of those careers that affects the society directly. And other than that, it's also one of those careers that are very lucrative. So you are, once you have a law degree, it opens up doors for you. So as all the panelists mentioned, that it's not just studying law and to become a lawyer. You're studying to broaden your mind and to know about different subject matters as well. So once you've studied law, I feel you know a little about everything. So you can go to any career choice for that matter. So I feel that any person who feels that they want a career that is both lucrative and is also something that is socially oriented, I feel that law is the best choice that a student can make when they have these type of goals in mind.
Thank you so much, Swadina. So as closing remarks, I would say that at LSAC Global, we are driven by a goal to expand, diversify, and strengthen legal systems in India. Since its inception, LSAC Global has believed that the legal profession should reflect the increasing diversity of our society and indeed the world that we inhabit. To this, I would like to highlight that the registrations for the LSAT India 2021 are now open. The early bird registration starts at rupees 3499 and is valid up till 15th January 2021. So I hope students who are listening to us would like to register as soon as possible and avail this particular discount. Secondly, we've also introduced certain student-focused initiatives. That is the Discover Law Student Ambassador Program. We encourage students to look up to this particular program. More information can be found out on our website, discoverlaw.in. I would be putting those links in the chat as well. I also invite the audience to contact us about hosting sessions at their schools, or even parents for certain open houses. We're willing to do these sessions, but of course, there must be around 15 or more people who are registered for the same. And last but not the least, we're also opening winter school applications in the month of January. It would be a 3 to 5 day online course for students applying to law schools. Additional details would follow, so I would request the audience to keep an eye on this particular space. Once again, I would like to thank the panelists for taking out time from their busy schedules to motivate law aspirants today. I thank the audience members as well for their active participation, and the LSAC team for the successful conduct of the webinar. See you soon next time. Till then, stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Sital. And great seeing you, Sadina. Best wishes to you.
Best
Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.